Okay, welcome to my 8th month update learning Latin. Today I'll go over what I've read, where I am in terms of my master plan of learning Latin, my progress, and anything else that seems interesting to talk about. I'll also talk a little bit about my stats in terms of my study time, my progress developing listening, and just in general, my ongoing thoughts of this process of learning this wonderful language. Okay, so let's get right into it. What have I read this month in Latin? So to start off with, I'm currently up to 458,000 words read, which feels kind of low. I felt like I would have expected to have read more. On the other hand, I did read quite difficult texts compared to my level the last month, so I guess that makes sense that the amount of reading I did was a little bit lower. But I did make up for that with listening, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So what did I read? Number one, I finished widely regarded reader Ad Alpes. How did I feel about it? So if I go back to my notes from before, I said, a great read, tons of unknown vocab, but the interlinear translation was very helpful for quick lookups. I learned a lot. So that's true. I would say that was more or less right. I would say how difficult was it? In hindsight, it's not that difficult, but yeah, vocab was a huge challenge. There was so much vocab that I had to look up, learn. I had to make Anki cards. I probably made about 200 Anki cards for the whole book, and I skipped a bunch of vocab that was a part of sentences that I didn't consider one target or I+1, meaning there was one. The rest of the sentence was very clear, but there was just one word I didn't know. And so that's fine. You don't want to necessarily memorize every single word you find. That's a really inefficient strategy. You want to find the words that are the low-hanging fruit, the words that are easy to learn, but you don't know. If you just keep on learning the easy words, eventually the hard words will be learned as well. So you don't want to ever I'm going to memorize every single word in De Bello Gallico. That would be a very bad strategy, a very inefficient strategy. It would work eventually, but you would be hindering your own progress with that strategy, but maybe I'll talk about that another time. So yeah, at Alpes, I overall enjoyed it. I mean, the stories were generally good and entertaining. A lot of it I had read before, but in general, pretty entertaining. Among readers, I think the thing I liked the most about it was that it did feel closer to authentic texts. Not that I would really know what that is because I haven't read that many authentic texts, but it did feel more like a totally different language versus a slightly sanitized version, if that makes sense. And I do know that there were little bits and pieces from original texts sort of slipped in there and little phrasings and stuff like that. So overall, great read. I would recommend it. Fairly challenging, but mostly for vocab purposes. After that, I read the book Fabulae ab Urbe Condita. I've also seen it written Fabulae ab Urbe Conditae, which I'm not good enough at grammar to know exactly why it should be one or the other, but I've seen both. Anyways, what did I say about it? I wrote simply pretty tough, especially the second half. I would say that is also correct. The first half of the book is basically like baby Livy, I would say. That it's the stuff that you will see in Roma Aeterna in a slightly simplified form, just like a notch easier, a notch simplified. But in general, pretty good read. Somewhat challenging, I guess, from what I remember, but it was good. And then the second half of the book was, I don't remember specifically, again, just I think famous Roman people. We can double check. Let's look real quick. Okay, so the second part was adapted from Charles Lamon's Char Lomon de Viris Illustibus. That should be Illustribus, I think. Urbis Romae ad Romulo ad Augustum. So again, just kind of famous people and famous events that those famous people were involved with. And again, I found it generally a good read. I would say the second half was much harder than the first half. And I'm pretty sure there was whole lines directly from original text. So I would say my impression is that it's a lightly adapted. I know the original text was sort of original in a way, but I think it was like there was quite a lot of whole lines. And I know there was whole lines from original text because I remember I think it was Suetonius, I want to say, that I was just looking on latinlibrary.com or whatever it's called, and I was just reading a little bit about one of the characters that happened to be in Fabulae ab Urbe Condita, and I was reading some of the lines, and it was hard because it's an authentic author, but I was like, wait a minute, this is an exact line that I just read from the same book. So it was hard. It was good read. I definitely went through it slower than I did through Ad Alpes, and probably because I didn't have an interlinear translation to go with it. So I had to kind of just brute force my way through it, looking up a bunch of stuff, accepting ambiguity, all that stuff we're supposed to do. So it was a good experience. I would recommend it. It's definitely a bit of a boot camp. That Ad Alpes, or Fabulae ab Urbe Condita, is kind of a 1-2 punch, a little bit of a boot camp, but I think it's good. Ad Alpes, somewhat easier perhaps syntactically and grammatically, but lots of vocab. Fabulae ab Urbe Condita, not too bad in terms of vocabulary, but definitely harder in terms of syntax and grammar. So I think they are very good preparations for getting to the next step. And then after that, as you can guess from, I also read the first few chapters of Roma Aeterna, which is great because it's kind of like all this reading was meant to be preparing me for. So the question is, how did I feel about Roma Aeterna now that I've done all this reading? I've read over 400,000 words. Am I officially ready? Have I bridged that notorious gap between Familia Romana and Roma Aeterna? And the answer is, it's going great. So I'll show you where I'm at. So I read the first, we can just go through it. So the first chapter is Roma Aeterna, which is written entirely by Urbe, I believe, and it's sort of just a tour of Rome as it's been described. And that went really well. Honestly, I would say it just went pretty smoothly. So let's bring it up for dramatic effect. Yeah. So I would say it went really smoothly. Really not very much vocabulary I didn't know. I did not experience any kind of vocab wall when I went through that first chapter. And in fact, the grammar also and syntax, not that hard, I would say. I wouldn't say it's easy necessarily. Like I wouldn't say it was like, it's not like me opening up the Cambridge Latin course and just reading the first book. Like, I'd fly through that. So this is definitely, I'm not like reading it like English or anything, but it went very smoothly, I would say, relatively quickly. I think it probably took me about 45 minutes to an hour to go through the chapter. So obviously not super fast, not like extensive reading fast, but I would say I really didn't have very much problem with it. Yeah, maybe one or two little parts that I was like a little unsure exactly what they were talking about or exactly how the sentence fit together. But no, I would say chapter 36 went very well. I also didn't find chapter 36 particularly boring. I know that's kind of the criticism that I've often heard of 36, that, it's just talking about monuments and buildings, but I thought it was pretty interesting, a little bit of the history and some of the historical people involved in each location. I don't have the greatest ability in terms of spatial awareness, so I can't exactly visualize Rome from that description. That's definitely a weakness I have, but I found it interesting. I didn't find it particularly boring. And then 37 is Troia Capta, which is from the Aeneid, book 2, but I guess it's been taking the verse and making it more prose. I don't know to what extent it's been adapted. I know it has been adapted, but is this just basically the same, but just rearranged a little? Or is it significantly rewritten to make it easier? I honestly don't know. But I have to say 37 also went very smoothly. I think it took me again about 45 minutes to an hour. Again, not too bad in terms of vocabulary. Yes, there was one or two spots that I found a little confusing. There was one part where snakes came from the sea, I seem to remember, and then it basically wrapped around one of the high priests, and it was sent from, I don't remember which god sent the snakes, and it was really good. It was very dramatic. It was a very exciting part of the chapter. But anytime you have any kind of descriptive imagery like that, I think that's some of the most challenging stuff you can read, especially in a second language. But that part was slightly confusing in terms of just exactly what was happening, in terms of who was happening to what. I figured out, I think, eventually, but that was just one part I got slightly stuck on. But again, went very smoothly. I didn't really have much trouble in terms of vocabulary or grammar, honestly. It just went pretty good. Again, 45 minutes to an hour to get through it. Not much to say. I really enjoyed it. I would say these Aeneid chapters, probably the most enjoyable Latin reads I've had so far in the last 8 months. Honestly, I can't think of a better one. I mean, I really enjoyed Ritchie's Fabulae Facules, but this is definitely a step up because this feels this is good stuff. It's good writing, obviously, because Virgil is obviously one of the best writers of all time. So it makes sense that a slightly adapted or maybe moderately adapted version of his writing would be very, very good. So that's my experience, and I'm enjoying it quite a lot. So it makes me very excited to read the Aeneid and the original eventually, just the whole thing. Even better to be able to I guess I don't think anyone's actually done a very good recording of the entire Aeneid from beginning to end. There's like books 1 and 4 and 5 or something, but maybe one day someone will do it. I don't know, but it would be fun to listen to the whole thing just from beginning to end. I'm sure there must be an audiobook somewhere out there with good vowel length and good pronunciation and stuff, but I'm not sure. But it would be very cool to listen to the entire Aeneid from beginning to end after maybe I read it and studied it, just experience it in its full glory. But I have to say I very much enjoyed the Aeneid chapters, and I'm especially funny because I finally understood why Aeneid's wife got left behind, because I've read the story several times, because often in these readers, simplified versions of the stories will be told again and again, but I never understood why is it that the wife got left behind, like, you know, the father on the shoulders famously and holding the son with the hand, but why the wife? And as it described in the chapter, at least, that they had heard some Greek soldiers at one point and they had to take the different roads, so then she couldn't find out where they went and she got lost and left behind as a result. Again, it never made sense before. It's just like, why didn't you care about your wife? You know, it's like almost like they just kind of forgot. They're like, wife? Who's that? But I thought it was very, very good. All right, and chapter 38, also very good. I would maybe a slight hair step up in terms of difficulty and the amount of vocab, but this one is also very good. I don't remember exactly what happened in it. This might be the one with the Cyclops and some other monsters, which was pretty cool. But I, like I said, enjoyed it. Took me probably about an hour or so, and yeah, not much to say, I guess, and just enjoyed it. The vocab was still pretty fine. And then finally, just this morning, I finished chapter 39. This one felt a hair harder, maybe like a notch up compared to the previous chapters. I don't know why that is, but I very much enjoyed it. I liked the stuff with the gods, because for some reason, in a lot of these readers, it's been de-emphasized, all the god stuff, whereas I'm reading this, I'm like, the gods are like this enormous part of these stories, and it's very cool, you know, with Juno and Cupid shows up and other people, and it's like really cool, and it's really interesting, that interaction between humans and the wrath of the gods. So when Neptune shows up, and there's like the god of the wind and storms who, I don't remember, I think it was probably Juno that convinced him to let it loose, to blow the Aeneid, his navy, his fleet all over the place. And then Neptune was like, what? You're taking my power away. And the part where he like brings his head up out of the water and sees like this, for some reason I found that a very fun, not funny exactly, but just a very striking bit of imagery of him like arising from the sea, just poking his head up out of the waves and seeing this going on. He's like, what the heck? Like, what are you doing? He's like, this is my domain. And so, yeah, it's great. And then Dido showing up is really cool. Again, I would say this chapter, it does feel like it's becoming like less adapted, if it makes sense. Like it feels like the word order and the syntax, maybe not the grammar, but at least the word order and syntax feels a little bit closer to the poetry, is my guess. Still very much prose, but less strict, simple. I wouldn't say simple before, but a little bit harder syntax, let's say. But it went well. I would say this one took me like quite a bit longer, somewhere between an hour and a half and 2 hours to get through, just probably because of the difficulty. I also started putting more cards into Anki from this chapter. You know, before I didn't really feel that much need because it was relatively few words, but the amount of unknown vocab is starting to creep up just a little bit. Still like very readable. It's not like there are multiple words per sentence I'm not getting, but there was enough where I felt like, you know, I can make 10, 20 Anki cards from this chapter. I might as well do it. Maybe it wasn't even that much. It's funny, there was one word that it was, I don't remember, it was prokella, which is like big winds and storms. I actually did learn that word before in a different reader, but I completely forgot that I had. Even worse is after I made the Anki card, the next day I finally got that card back and reviewed it. So I'm like, oh, I made that card for no reason, but that's just kind of what happens with Anki sometimes. But yeah, this one is definitely, like I would say, a notch up in terms of difficulty. Although I will say that reading some of the poetry, maybe not this particular section, but it's like little by little, I'm like getting a little less freaked out reading the poetry. In the past, it would be the prose stuff, and then I'll try and read the poetry, and my brain's just like, this is not making any sense. It's just crazy. But little by little, especially when I got to the end of the chapter, that when Dido and the Trojans and everyone is having dinner, and they're about to tell the story of the siege of Troy and stuff like that. Some of the poetry, you know what? I'm starting to actually understand a little bit of it. It's obviously still a little fuzzy, but little by little, you know, it's becoming a little less scary. Let's put it that way. Still far from like ready to read the Aeneid, really realistically, but I'm getting more and more every time I attempt these little passages. I don't stress them. I'm not like breaking them down. I'm not like analyzing too much depth, because I have a feeling like it's just a little bit above my level, so there's no reason to worry too much. Like I think about it and I read it a couple times and see what I can get from it, but I'm not stressed about understanding it perfectly. But yeah, little by little, these little excerpts that you see, I'm starting to get more and more from them, which is nice and very, very rewarding. I'm like, this is like, it's like one of like the pinnacle pieces of literature and history in Western culture. So it feels very, very cool that at least I'm starting to see that the light at the end of the tunnel in terms of getting to actually being able to read it. And yeah, so that's it. Went pretty smoothly. Again, it took me an hour and a half to 2 hours, so quite a bit longer than the previous chapter. But so hopefully that's not the case moving forward, and that chapter 40 will go a little bit faster. I'm not really sure. And I do know, like, as it goes on, some of the chapters get much longer. These are typically about 300 lines. So about, let's see, this one was 315. So if we average about 7, so that's about 2,000 words or something per chapter. But I imagine it's going to be like twice that later. So, but again, I don't think that is an unreasonable pace. Like, about a chapter a day. It took, again, chapter 39 took me a couple of days. Actually, the other day I did 2 of the Roma Aeterna chapters in a day, which was cool, but I had quite a bit of extra time that day. So yeah, so long story short, I would say my strategy paid off in terms of doing lots of extended reading, not really doing any grammar drills whatsoever. I did actually download a grammar drill app. I'm like, I should probably be a good Latin student. Why don't I just like do it a little bit? It can't hurt, especially if it's like, if I'm doing it when I otherwise wouldn't be studying Latin, like I'm sitting on the couch and I can't really focus on reading. What if I just like do those grammar drills? I lasted like a day or maybe 2, and I just like, I can't stick with this. It's like, I just cannot, I'm not saying there's no value, but it's like, there's a real separation between, it just feels like a disconnect between actually improving my language ability versus this stuff. I'm not saying it has no value, but I'm just like, it feels very tangential. It feels very unrelated to language learning, if that makes sense. So, no, if someone likes to do that, you're welcome to, as long as you're not sacrificing your reading and listening time for doing these drills. And from every indicator from this process, and one of the reasons I wanted to document it is that I feel like I'm making consistent, steady progress in terms of my comprehension. My active ability is awful. Like I can't really, other than like the obvious stuff, mihi nomen est, Justin, etc. Like Justinus, whatever the Roman version is. Other than like the basic stuff, gratias tibiago, etc. Like, the stuff you've heard a billion times. But other than that stuff, like my actual active ability, let alone writing, probably non-existent. But again, that's normal. That's exactly what I would have expected. So there's nothing wrong with that. The fact that I can barely even read real Latin yet. So it's like, it would be weird if I could, right? If I could actually do it, I would say that would be an anomaly. I would say that there was something strange that happened, that I was able to write and speak Latin well, or at least had the ability to start developing that, despite my reading comprehension and listening comprehension being quite low still. So everything is going to plan in terms of my predictions and my methodology, in my opinion. Like, I think there's no weird surprises so far. So there we go. So the plan, let's go back to my optimized list, my master plan to master Latin. I'm being slightly sarcastic, obviously. So I am almost done. So yeah, last month I finished up stage 3, which was preparation for Roma Aeterna. I almost thought that maybe I overshot it a little bit, because I would say Fabulae ab Urbe Condita is harder than these first chapters of Roma Aeterna. So possible that you could like swap it, like maybe or you could even do like the first half of Fabulae ab Urbe Condita and then do Roma Aeterna and then or something. I don't know. But at the end of the day, there's no way to perfectly make this smooth transition. There's always going to be a little bit bumps, like something slightly too hard, something a little bit too easy. So as long as you're like progressively making it more difficult, traveling more terrain in terms of things you're reading, doesn't matter too much. But I do like the fact that because I went through those, the opening chapters of Roma Aeterna feel very manageable and very approachable, and that feels very rewarding, instead of like brute forcing, struggling through, which apparently is the experience of a lot of people. So yeah, so I don't have that much more to do, just 3 more chapters. So that'll probably be less than a week, that's for sure, maybe 3 to 5 days, something like that, hopefully. And then I'll be done those chapters. And again, this is based on the recommendations by Raphael to, things you can do to prepare for some of the harder later chapters of Roma Aeterna. So then after that, after those 3 chapters of the opening, when it starts transitioning to the less adapted Livy stuff, I'll be reading Wengu let's try and pronounce this correctly. Evangelium secundum Mattheum. That was awful. The Gospel of Matthew, which is 16,000 words. So I'll be reading that, see how that goes. Everyone always says like, oh, it's so easy. And, I'm sure it is, but sometimes it feels very dismissive. It's like, just because it's easy doesn't mean it's not good or important or interesting, but that's neither here nor there. And then after that, Huginius, Fabulae, Tropius, and then the Gospel of Mark, and then a couple of not readers, but they're medieval Latin, I believe, or late Latin, that are by female authors. That'll be cool. Check those out. I don't know how many words are in there yet. I'll have to calculate that. And then the plan is to read the first 2 books of Gallic Wars, mostly because that's about 12,000 words, 15,000 words, which is about how much I'm doing for each different thing I'm doing. Again, this is just trying to get like a broad overview of roughly approachable material. And so like, maybe I'll be like, you know what? I just want to read all of Gallic Wars. I'll be ready, or I feel like I can do it. Then maybe I will, but the plan is just to do the first 2, and then if I decide later to read the rest, great. And I will at one point read it, and then Sermones Romani Amphitryo Viri Illustres, which is by the Charles Lamond, the French educator, Latinist, and then the Gospel of Luke, these ghost stories that Nasusurai, the person online, Jessica, I think her name is, she did a YouTube video on, so I think I'll just read through those. They're not very long, it's just 3,000 words, but I was intrigued, so I thought I'll check them out. And then this one was recommended by another YouTuber that made a video, Historiae de Duobus Amantibus, a erotic novel allegedly, so I'll be reading that. It's only 13,000 words, so not that bad. And then I'll be doing the medieval Latin readers. Probably not going to do these ones, the ones recommended, just because there's no PDFs available, making like Anki card creation a huge pain, and just reading on paper right now just doesn't seem super practical. So I'll just probably get the other, there's a couple other Latin anthologies that I'll probably read first. And then Roma Aeterna, which I think is it's just one chapter 47. It's not Livy, it's something else. I'm not sure what it is, but I'll read that. And then Nepos, I'll read all of his stuff. It's 28,000 words. Probably have to use, depending on how good I am at that point, it's hard to say, but I'll probably have an interlinear translation, or maybe just do bilingual. Like I'll just have the English on the right side or flip to it whenever I need to double check my understanding. But we'll see how that goes. And then the Gospel of St. John, I'm assuming. And that's all the Gospels. I'm not sure if I'll read the entire Vulgate at this point. It's fairly long, and I don't necessarily have a burning passion to read the entire thing, but I think the Gospels, I've never actually read them in English, so it seems like a good thing to learn or to read at one point, just in terms of culture and stuff like that. So, and it's just good reading practice, so why not? And then basically finish up Roma Aeterna till the end, basically, and then read the Cicero and Sallust Urbe readers. And then Gesta Romano, I think medieval or late Latin, I don't remember, text. And then after that, I think I'm basically like done this, like, not done Latin necessarily, but kind of done this sort of systematic thing, because I'll be probably at the level where I can kind of just read what I'm interested in. And yeah, there'll be stuff that'll be probably still above my level and stuff, but it's at that point where I'm not really worried so much about being systematic of finding things, just focus on my interests. If something seems way too hard, I guess try something else for a little while, but that's the plan. I think this will be enough extensive reading. I'm not entirely sure how many words are in this section, but it looks like there's 20 things, and if each one's about 15,000 words, that's like another 300,000 words. So it seems like a lot. So it'll take me a while. This might take me until the end of the year, but we'll see. Maybe I'll speed up my reading a little bit. Yeah, so that's the plan. Again, everything going according to plan. It feels very affirming that things seem to be clicking into place, and I am getting better and better. And all right, so let's take a look at how much time I've spent with Latin. So I've been using, as I mentioned last video, I've been using Toggl, and honestly, I'm loving it. I know it's not for everyone to track how much you're studying, but it feels like it makes me more focused when I'm actually reading or listening to things, so that I don't like think about something else, or I check Twitter or something while I'm reading or something. Like it keeps me focused, because when I'm on the clock, now is my time to read and just get as much out of it as I can. And if I have to stop, I'll stop the timer. Yeah, and basically I just press a button when it's time to listen, or when it's time to read, I press the button, and then I read as much as I need to, and then when I'm done reading, I just click the button again. So it's very, very easy. And over time, little by little, I feel like my time has been improving. I've spent 51 hours, I guess, with Latin. I was originally dividing things up in terms of the books that I was reading. It's going to be a little untenable moving forward, so I'm just switching to just listening and reading as my like categories, because just for simplicity's sake. And I have been doing more listening lately, which is great. So I've done 13 and a half hours of listening in the last 5 weeks, I guess. And I've been doing definitely more lately. And the reason is just because I feel like I'm finally interested in it. I feel like it's time now. I feel like I have enough ability where I want to do it, if that makes sense. I'm not super interested in like YouTube or podcasts that people are being making right now so much. I mean, the occasional one, but I'm not super interested in that. But what I am interested is listening to recordings of stuff I've already read. So I subscribed to Luke Ranieri's Patreon, so I got his LLPSI, like his Famiglia Romana recordings, Fabulae Surae, Epitome Historiae Sacrae, Roma Aeterna, and I think also Sermones Romani. There we go. Sermones Romani and Amphitryo. I think those are the main ones that I actually care about. He has other things as well, but I don't actually care too much about. So I've been listening to that a lot, and I have noticed I have improved listening. Because I've already read them, that helps quite a lot. So once I start hearing keywords, I'm like, oh, this is that story, and then little by little, whole phrases I can hear in real time, and then sometimes whole sentences or multiple sentences even, depending on how hard the story was. And yeah, I mean, it's obvious, but the more you listen, the better you get. And if you've already read it, it's going to make a big difference in terms of comprehension. So that's the strategy. Now that I have kind of a bit of a backlog, I'm going to listen to all through Luke Ranieri stuff first, and then I'm going to probably subscribe to Legentibus again, because now that I've read most of those readers, I think I'm going to just listen to it all again and just commit to trying to listen as much as I can each day. I really don't like rereading stuff. I really don't. But I don't mind re-listening to things too bad. I think it's just, I'm not sure why. I just don't mind re-listening to things, especially if I'm like doing the dishes or making dinner or something like that. I don't mind re-listening to something because I'm only giving it like 3/4 of my attention or something. But even when I'm actually fully focused on listening, I don't mind listening to things I've read before more than once. Maybe not the same thing over and over again, but really listening to things I read before, I don't mind at all, and I enjoy it, and I think I get stuff out of it. Whereas rereading things I've read before, I just find very, very boring and soul sucking, honestly. So even though there might be benefit there, I think it's more benefit if I just, my like rereading time, I'll just devote to listening, and then so I'll be improving my listening and comprehension. The way I see it is reading is kind of covering new ground or new terrain, whereas listening is more about making it more automatic and more effortless, and automatic and effortless and fluent, I guess, in terms of your flow. Obviously, you can move forward and progress just through listening. That's definitely possible, and you don't even have to do any listening to develop good reading fluency. But I feel like the two things at the same time, they really complement each other, even though they are fundamentally two separate skills. So that's what I'm doing. So yeah, moving forward, I definitely want to spend more and more time listening. And again, especially things that I've already read, and especially, again, as I get more and more into these authentic texts, there are more of these audio, especially on Legentibus, audio stuff available. So just really leaning into that and getting that better so that I ultimately can just, again, listen to a Latin text without reading it and being able to just understand it. And that's the ultimate goal, hopefully. Okay, so yeah, at Alpes took me 23 hours, which is, I think it's kind of slow. I'm not really sure what I'm comparing myself to be honest. Fabulae Urbe Condita took me 9.5 hours, which meant I was going through it quite a bit slower than at Alpes. But again, because I didn't have the interlinear translation, it was a little bit slower to get through it. And then again, I just stopped keeping track of Roma Aeterna and just switched to listening and reading as my two categories. So there we go. All right, let's switch to Anki. In terms of my statistics, my average retention for cards over the last year has been 86%, which is kind of perfect. You want between 85 and 90% so that you're not spending too much time on old cards, and any cards that are too hard, you prune them right away. The last month is probably a little bit worse, 85.35, still pretty fine. Again, I have my leech threshold pretty low at just 3 lapses, so there's no risk really of being burdened by too many leeches. And in terms of my total cards, I have 1,114. Again, close to 200 of those are from Alpes, but again, I've been slowly adding a few more to Roma Aeterna. again, I'll just keep on using Anki as long as I find it useful. When it feels like I don't really need it anymore, then I'll just drop it. Again, no one really needs Anki, but it's helpful. I think it improves your ability to retain vocab. It shows that it means that you don't have to reread as much. At least that's my opinion. So I don't really have much more to say. So I guess I'm pretty much done for this update. Again, in terms of my master plan, the plan will be to finish the first 6 chapters of Roma Aeterna, read the Gospel of Matthew, and a few others. So I would say probably by next update, hopefully I'll be up to Passio Sanctarum Perpetuae et Felicitatis is my hope. Yeah, I would say that seems like a reasonable, modest goal, but hopefully it'll go even faster. Maybe Gospel of Matthew will go super fast and other stuff will go fast, but I'm not really sure. Maybe next month I'll do some kind of reading test to see have I improved. It's funny to find those chapters, those parts that I had tested myself before, and now they seem kind of easy. So we'll have to find maybe something like a Cicero letter or something, or maybe a section of Gallic Wars that I haven't read yet or something to test me, but maybe we'll do that next month. All right. Thanks for watching and have a good day. Bye.